going to add a little bit to the program that we did in the previous lesson. So I've got the project on the screen. I'm not asking you to write the project, but I'm asking you to follow along and do bits and pieces within the project. So in black at the top, I've got the original problem that we're trying to solve. Write a program which asks the user for a password, and if the user types a correct password, the message "you are logged in" is displayed on the screen. And in blue next to it, I've added a little bit to the problem. So it says if the password is incorrect, access denied is displayed. Now before, when the password was incorrect, nothing was displayed at all. So if we take a look at the example of the screens, so if the user enters an incorrect password, what will be shown this time is access denied, rather than it just leave it blank. And that's the only change. The rest of it is identical. So if the user enter a correct password like swordfish, it should say "you are logged in." Now at the end of the last lesson, I did ask you to type the second refinement, in other words, the one that initializes the variables at the top of the program. And if you've done that, then great, because the workload that you've got to do is greatly reduced. However, if you didn't write the program last time, then you've got a bit of typing to do. So what I've chosen as well is instead of just having the single variable that we had in the first program, I've decided to use the refined version where I set up all the variables at the start of the program. Now I think this is important. It's not necessary, it's important, because up and down the country different schools are going to be using different languages, and some of the languages, as I've mentioned before, require you to actually do this at the start, otherwise it doesn't work, the programs won't run. And when the exam board kind of give you pseudocode on the paper, they've got to take into account the people who are using Python, the people who are using PHP, the people who are using Pascal, all the different languages, and give them something that they're familiar with. So if we stick to this model where we define our variables or declare our variables at the start of the program, then we won't be caught out by an exam question that does it. You'll be quite used to it if you treat it as this is the way it's got to be. So one of the things I'm going to show you in this lesson is the flowchart. Now I've added a very simple, if the password is incorrect, access denied is displayed, and I've used these variables to initialize the program. And the flowchart is now rather large. So one of your tasks today is to have a crack at the flowchart. You'll see me, I'll do it, and you can copy what I do. I don't need you to think about it on your own. But I've introduced a new flowchart symbol, the box, just the rectangle, a little bit different to the input and output boxes. They're parallelograms. These are rectangles. They're called process boxes, and really it's just one line of code per box, so we don't put many lines of code in. But I'll explain that as we go through doing the flowchart. But I wanted to show you before we did it that actually now we're getting a flowchart which is getting a bit too big for our paper. So if we're doing it by hand, it's going to fill up an A4 sheet of paper, and if we're doing it on the computer, it's going to take a long time to do, and it's going to get rather messy. So maybe flowcharts is not the way to go at the moment. We might see a version later on where we use subroutines where we could probably tidy this up. But at the moment, I'm going to show you how to create the flowchart and sort of how to use lucid charts. If you're doing it by hand, then please be neat. I want ruled lines really to show the boxes rather than just vague scribbles on a piece of paper. I've also given you the pseudocode, and in the exercise for the lesson, you have the pseudocode that you're going to be writing the programs from. Don't worry too much, you'd probably only be making a single change if you've written the program to begin with. So what I've done is I've put the refined version, set password to empty string, set secret to swordfish, set prompt to please enter a password, set message to you are logged in. So I've got all these variables up here in black from the last lesson in my pseudocode. And then I've got one extra line because we need to have a message if the user types in the incorrect password. We want them to see the message access denied. So I've got a variable called failed to do that. So the blue line is the only difference between this lesson and the previous lesson. So write out prompt, read in password, same as last lesson. Then if password equals secret, well, I left it at that in the last lesson, but really in pseudocode, I would prefer you to put then on the end of your if statements, and then indent what happens when you when it's successful. So if it's true, if password equals secret, it's going to do the first line. And now I've introduced a second line of code, which is the point of today's lesson, and that is else. So what happens if this is true? If it equals secret, if it's true, it does the first line. If this equals secret is false, in other words, it's not the password, then it skips over that line and comes down to the else line and performs what's inside that. So if the password is not swordfish, it will jump over that line into the else part and write out the failed message, which is access denied. And this is called an if-else statement. And there is a particular way of writing it in the flowchart, which I will explain as we go along. So let's go to the test plan. The only differences I made in my test plan was my expectations. Before I said that nothing would be displayed. Now I've said access denied is displayed. So when you run your program, if you just press enter, you're going to expect access denied. If you just press, or if you just type in a wrong password, access denied is going to be displayed. It's the only changes I've made to my program. That's all. Then I've written the program in Python, which you need to do. So copy this down if you need to. If you did it in the last lesson, brilliant. Then you've only got a few lines. This one, failed access equals denied, and the else part to actually write. If you didn't write it in the last one, copy it down because you're going to be writing it in this one. And I want the work back from you. So there is the code that matches the pseudocode. And if you take a look at it, it's almost line per line, take the pseudocode and translate it into Python. And below that, I've also put the comments in. And I said, you put comments in at the end. It might be nice if you do it as you go along, but sometimes it becomes very unreadable because of the comments that are in there. So I haven't commented every single line. I've said initialize variables, which covers these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines of code just with one comment, initialize variables. That's good enough. Then I've said where my main program sort of begins. Once I've initialized everything, this is where my program begins. And then I put get password from the keyboard, and I've got 2 lines of code for that. So I'm not doing each and every line this time. I'm doing a couple of lines if I can, just so that it's sensible for somebody else to read. So that's the state of play at the moment. So you really need to understand this code, how it relates to the pseudocode, and you're going to be writing it in this lesson. So as we did the test plan, I've now got my tests. And really nothing's changed unless you've made a keyboard error here and you've got a problem. But if the program is the same as last time, it should all work as expected. So when you enter nothing, it should display the message access denied. If you type an incorrect password, it should say access denied as expected. And if you type the correct password, it should say you're logged in as expected. So there's the results of running my tests. And I have put the new results screenshots below it. So please enter a password. Nothing was pressed. It says access denied. That's test 1. Test 2, please enter a password. I've typed in an incorrect password. It says access denied as expected. And finally, please enter a password. Swordfish, you are logged in as expected. And finally, the refinement of the program. because we had a second refinement in the last program to sort of have good programming practice, then there's not a lot to do in this one. It's going back to that very simple refinement where we've got 2 lines of code where we print the prompt and then we get the input, and we combine the 2 lines to be raw_input prompt. So we're really losing 1 line of code, print prompt here. So that's the refinement, and at the moment that's the end of my document. So what I want to do really now is go back to the flowchart and show you how difficult this is if you're going to be using the flowchart for your programs. So this is the flowchart I left at in the last lesson, and what I've got to do is manage this part here, which is the if statement, but also manage up here by initializing the variables. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually get rid of that. So there's no link, because I'm going to move this down a little bit as we go. And then I'm going to explain how we do the if statement. Now notice we're sort of running out of page already, and that's because this page is actually landscape. On the side here at the very top, we've got the settings where we can actually change the page to be portrait. So here where it says format landscape, I can change that to portrait and give myself a little bit more space on the bottom. But even so, you might still run out of space. So what happens? Here we're outputting a message, please enter a password, then we're inputting the password, and here is our if statement, which is a diamond shape. It's selection. I want you to remember that word. If statement means selection, and we'll come to that a little bit later. And it says, do the passwords match? Yes. Output, you're logged in, and then it just goes straight to no. But this time we want, if the passwords don't match, we also want to include a message. So what I'm going to do is get rid of these 2 lines. I'll put them back in a second. And we need another one of these boxes. So I'm going to move this end down a little bit. There we go. And I'm going to put in another output box. And I'm going to write there output. And actually, yeah, okay, I will do it with the code at the moment. Access denied. Sorry about that. I just had a thought as we were going along. Access denied. Now, so if the passwords don't match, so they did, so it was yes. If they don't match, it's going to be no, and that goes to the box down here. And once we've completed that, it just goes to the end of the program. But the problem is what happens, because in our code, if we go back to our code here, when we did this, if it equals secret, we did that message. If it was false and it didn't equal the secret message, it jumped, it skipped over to the else section. And we have to do that. We can't come back here and then print this out. We have to skip over. So this is my skipping over to the point after the program. And there we go. That's how to do that. So the flow of the program is print out a message, get the password from the user, check if they match. If they do match, say you're logged in, and come down to here, end. So let's run that through again with a false one. Print the message on the screen, enter a password, get the password. Do they match? No, they've typed the wrong password. It says access denied, and then it goes to the end of the program. And that is basically our program. So we could just click from start and put it onto the first box. But I wanted to introduce you to the process box, and it was 1 line of code per box. And we did this in our project. So I've got here set password to empty string, set secret to swordfish. So we need to do that. So I'm going to grab a process box and I'm going to put it here. Now notice that we are kind of running out of space. So I'm going to say set password to empty. Okay. Let's move this down. So if I highlight all of these, I can just move this down a little bit. I'm probably going to have to do some shrinking to fit it all on the page, because I'm going to have quite a few of these boxes. So the next one is my next line, set secret to swordfish. So I'm going to pull out another process box, and I'm going to put in here, set secret to swordfish. Then I'm going to do the next line, which says set prompt to please enter a password. Drag out another process box. Set prompt to, please enter password. And as you can see, I'm still running out of space, and I'm actually running out of page. So the only thing I can really do is start shrinking these boxes down. So I'll just do it really, really quickly to give myself a little bit of space. You can shrink them down to make them fit. I'll leave it up to you. But as you can see, flowcharts can get rather messy when we're playing around, and we need to shrink these also shortly. So that's 3. We had a couple more. So set message to you're logged in and set fail to access denied. So need another one. Process box. Set message to you are logged in. Let's shrink that down now. Whoops. There we go. And again, out of space. So let's just pull this down a little bit. And this is why I want you to have a go at flowcharting, because it might be that, what you actually choose to do. So you need to understand how to use the software as well as build the flowcharts. Like I'm having difficulty here actually moving this down. There we go. So I've got one more process box to stick in, and that was set failed to access denied. And there we go. So I've now got all of my process boxes in. Let's make that the same size. And I can start joining them up. Let's shrink this one down a little bit. I'm going a bit wild. There we go. I'll move it across maybe. So join that to that. Join that. So I didn't join it. When you get the red dot, you can do it. Let's try again. There we go. Join that to that. Join that to that. And once they're joined, you can sort of move them together. So I need a bit of space there, and they'll take the arrow with them. So join that to that. Let's move this down a bit. And join that to that. Whoops, that's the wrong one. I don't want to delete the box. There we go. Job done. And finally join that to that. Now we call where all of this, where each box is sort of one arrow down from the next. We're going from the top to the bottom, just following the flow. There's no sort of going off to the left, going off to the right, or going back up. We call this a sequence. That is an important word to learn, which we shall look at in great detail later. That will crop up in the exam. So there's my program. I do need to change these. Output, please enter a password. I don't need the words please enter a password anymore. I just need to say output prompt, because we set what prompt was to begin with. So it's tidying a little bit. Input password, we're okay with that. Do passwords match? I could ask the question, password equals, secret. Very difficult for me to see. Password equals secret, yes. And if it is, then we just output. And we need to output the message. And the message would be, you're logged on. If not, we need to output failed. And finally, end. So that is the new flow chart. As you could probably see in the document that I did. There we go. It's a little bit longer with all the process boxes in and the messages. If we start adding to this program, which we are going to do, then we're going to run out of space. So we need to learn how to shrink this diagram down, because we can't just have things all over the place. It needs to be in the correct fashion. In other words, following the flow of the program, going from the top to the bottom, and at the bottom, that's where our program ends. So there you go, that's the lesson so far. What I've done is given you an exercise to do where I've given you this code and I'm asking you to write this program. And then I am asking you to do it in an alternate way. So at the top, when we had this, it says if the user types a correct password, that's one if statement, and then it says if the password is incorrect. Well, that's two if statements. So there's another way of writing this program, and that is with two if statements. So we're going to test it to see if it's correct, and we're going to test it to see if it is incorrect. And in your exercise, I want you to write my version, and then I want you to write a version with two if statements. And to be honest, you don't have a lot to write. You'll just need to change that line there for the piece of code that I give you, and then run both programs to see if there's any difference. There shouldn't be, but one is a good way of programming and one is a poor way of programming. I'll leave you to think about which one is the good one and which one is the poor one. But also, if you write this as two if statements, then the flowchart will change. I want you to think about how that flowchart would change. So that is your exercise for today's lesson. I will also give this the code in PHP. So if you want to know how to do this in PHP, in other words, setting up variables to begin with, and then having an else statement, that will be in the PHP section. But that's up to you. That's the lesson for today. Please have a go at the code. If you can't do it in Python, you don't have access to Python, then write it down on paper. And really, you'll just be copying the code that I've written, but obviously you're going to have to change the code for the second if statement. Good luck with that.